here. My name is Brian Puente. I support Adobe Creative Cloud at the University of Arizona. And today we're going to be talking about Adobe XD. And basically a first look at kind of getting started here. I am monitoring the chat, so if you have questions, feel free to leave them there and we'll get to them kind of as we go. But the idea is to take kind of an initial look at XD, how it works, and how we can build in it. So this will run from 12:30 to 1:30, and then this will be available to watch later. So it should be great. All right, cool. So what is XD? I think that Adobe's website does a really good job of showing what this is, so we're going to use that. So basically what Adobe XD allows us to do is it allows us to create prototypes for content that lives on screens. So by screens, I mean everything from phones to tablets to HUDs on cars to basically if it has a digital screen, we can kind of create a prototype for it. So prototyping can be really helpful when you are going into not only like app development, but just like whenever you're building anything for interactions, so you can kind of test out what interactions look and feel like inside of XD, either in really high fidelity or really simple or really low fidelity, before they ever go into kind of a software development cycle. The benefit of using stuff like XD is that we can save a lot of time. We're just opening up a Behance, section here that was built in XD, which is pretty cool. So, but basically the idea is that we can use XD to create prototypes so that we can kind of test out the ideas that we have and use them. So before they ever kind of go to market or wherever their final destination is. And it's also a great way to kind of get some usability testing on your prototypes. So inside of XD, you also have the option to send out for view on mobile devices. So you can literally test out what those functionalities are supposed to look and feel like inside of those spaces. But essentially the idea behind a prototype is to empower you to create what the look and feel of whatever you're prototyping is without having to be a developer. So basically we're using it. It's a pretty awesome design tool to help us do that. We're going to kind of break down the basics of it, but I wanted to make sure that I talked a little bit about what XD is. Cool. So let me go ahead and get rid of this screen. Then we're going to go ahead and take a look at XD. And I'll just go File, New, so we can kind of see what the new structure looks like. When you initially launch XD, this is what you're going to be greeted with. And I'll zoom in here just a little bit. Cool. So when you first open XD, this is what you're going to be greeted with. So basically this will come up and you'll see that we have some dimensions for things. And again, they actually outline it pretty well here: design, prototype, and share. So what we want to do is we can take a look at these kind of different standard formats for creating content. So we can kind of use one of these as kind of a baseline. These little drop downs show you more sizes. But we can pick one of these. We won't do that just yet, but there's also a tutorial here that you can go through, and I have that pulled up actually, that will walk you through some of the basics of getting started in XD. So basically what you'll do is, the idea is that we can take these pieces and kind of connect them together so that they interact. I'll show you an example of that we built a little bit ago. So click here. I'll show you this guy. So basically this is kind of built to be an interactive menu for for instructors who maybe want to decide what type of application they want to use to share for students to create documents. So let's say that they wanted to create an interactive one. This is a clickable button that takes you to a page. Let's say that you wanted them to build app prototypes. This gives you kind of a breakdown of XD and what it is. This is a really simple prototype. It kind of just shows what interaction will look and feel like. Kind of cool. And at like its most base level, that's what we're trying to accomplish with XD, is build this prototype of these design tools so that our users kind of get a facsimile of what's supposed to be happening inside of these applications. It's pretty cool. And then Should this ever go to like a development phase, you can hand this off directly to a developer, and they can have access to not only the colors that you had, but the fonts that you used and the images that you have, so that you can create the content that they can help you create the content you want to create. And I think it has the potential to save a whole lot of time, because you'll have kind of the look and feel of what you want done already. So that makes it easier for a developer to kind of deliver what you asked for, which is pretty cool. But that being said, I think we've explained XD. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start diving into how to build an XD. Cool. So let me go ahead and find this guy here. All right, so I have a document here that I'm going to use to kind of demonstrate what XD looks and feels like. It's pretty awesome. So this was a document that you can pick up at letsxd.com in their Getting Started section. I really like it. I think it does a really good job of illustrating what things should look and how XD works. And I'm going to kind of just walk through it and give you my 2 cents on it, and then we'll take it from there. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. So I'm going to we're basically going to walk through building a prototype, and they have some really good keyboard shortcut here that you can take a look at. And kind of go over the different tools. So on this left-hand side over here, we have our toolbar, and there are a bunch of different tools. We'll be using a few of them, and I'll zoom in over here so you can see it. We have the select tool here. That's going to be what we use to kind of click and drag things around. We have the rectangle tool for creating rectangles or circles or whatever it is that you're going to be creating. Triangles, polygons, lines, pens, all of these other things. And we'll be using a few of these as we kind of go here. But we're probably going to start with the artboard. Moving on though, we have kind of 3 sections that we're going to be living in as we're designing inside of XD. You have the design section. That's where you're going to kind of be building what you want it to look like. And then you have your prototyping section. The prototype section is where you will kind of connect the boards together so that they interact and do the things you want them to do. And then last but not least is share. So once you're done, let's share right there. That will be how you get this out to people so they can view it. Cool. So other things to note here, on the bottom left-hand side of the window, I'm kind of hovering over here, but I'll zoom in. We have a few buttons here. So we have our assets, which will show us kind of all the different things that are in our project over here based off the board that we select. And then we have our layers. So this is a layered program just like a Photoshop would be. And basically when you click on different pages, you will see different layers show up over here on the left-hand side. These just let you know that this is the content on the screen in order from top to bottom. And then if you wanted to, there are these plugins. So basically, like lots of Adobe applications, you can have additional documents. Not additional documents, additional kind of apps to help supplement your program and things like that. If you needed profile pictures, they have plugins for all sorts of different things. You just go to Discover Plugins. It'll pull up a web page that shows you all the different types of plugins you can have. And these just help build more interaction into your designs. So kind of cool. And we may pick up one in a minute, but we'll see. All right. So then last but not least, before we move on to actually building some stuff, we have this section on the right-hand side over here. I'm going to select something. This is a context-sensitive menu that's going to change based off of what you have selected here. So if you select the text box here, you'll see options for, if that's text, yeah. So we drill down, we'll see kind of options for that. Or if we click on this, because I think this is text here, unlock that. Cool. We'll see options for text. If we choose the plant, we'll see options for that plant. That's going to be important as we kind of move through here, but I just want to make sure that you do that this is a context-sensitive menu. All right, cool. So first thing we're going to talk about is artboards and kind of how to build them. So basically everything that's in XD, if you want it to be viewable, has to sit on an artboard. So I'll click on this guy right here. They have this preview button up in the top that will show us kind of a preview of what this looks like. Click on that. And then here's our preview here. So all of this shows up because it's in this artboard here. If I move this, if I take a piece and move it off the artboard, you'll see even though it's still visible over here, when I go to preview, that will not be there. So if you want it to be viewable in your prototype, you want to make sure that it's on the artboard that you selected. Okay. So let me go ahead and move that back. I'm just going to go ahead and hit Control Command Z. So that works over here. Just moves it back, nice and easy. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to fill out this section right here. So so this is just a frame for us, but we need to put an artboard inside of that frame. So if we go to our left-hand side over here under Tools, we'll find the Artboard tool. Click on that. And then once we do that, we have a bunch of different sizes here on the right-hand side. So iPhones, iPhone 11, all of these other things. If you know exactly what you're developing for, pick the thing that works for you. You see that there's Apple Watch and a bunch of Android sizes too, and then Surface, then web sizes if you're building a website. But I'm going to go ahead and just click and drag out a box here. That's how we can kind of set a custom size. So what we're going to do is just move our cursor. I'll zoom in a little bit. I'm just holding down the Option or Alt key while I'm scrolling in. But if you have a trackpad, you can pinch and pull to zoom in as well. Then I'm going to click and drag to create that box. And you'll see that this white box starts to form. This is our artboard here. A couple different ways to know that we're on an artboard. We'll get to that in just a second. There we go. They gave me these guides to help me out. Perfect. There's my artboard. I can tell that it's an artboard by a couple ways. At the top it says Artboard 1. This one says Splash. You can name these artboards pretty easily. And I'm going to go back to my selection tool here. Keyboard shortcut for that is V. Double click on the artboard and then give it a name. Just call this Start. Cool. And that will be the artboard's name kind of going forward. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we can do here. So we're going to take this content and move it over here to the right. We could copy and paste like that. We could also Alt click and drag to move those over. Alt or Option will allow you to duplicate an item. This works in Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign, so it's kind of a handy tool. But you'll see that it's a little bit hard to move into place here. So if I take more of these, I'll just copy that. Just right click, copy, then right click, paste. And you'll see that if I just copy and paste, it will paste it right in place. So when you're dealing with a lot of applications that you're building, if you think about any application or website you're on, typically buttons and layouts are in similar places. So if you wanted to take everything from here and move it to the other artboard, we could just highlight this and then Command or Control C to copy, and then click on Start. And then we're going to click on Command or Control V to paste. And we'll paste everything in place. So everything that was on the left-hand side will be on the right-hand side in the exact same order that it was in. Cool. So, speaking of order, we'll see that if we zoom in here a little bit, that this little circle that's right here, this little curve, is on top of this plant. If you wanted it behind the plant, pretty easy to do. We go to our couple different ways to do it. We can go to our layers panel, then we'll see over here it says background circle. We can click and drag that and move that underneath that plant. So now that the plant is more visible. Or if I wanted to move it on top of everything, I just kind of click and drag to move it to where I want it. So I can kind of do that, and I can also select what I want, and then I can use keyboard shortcuts to do the same thing. Now, I'm going to go ahead and adjust the transparency of it so it's a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to go ahead and increase this fill to this appearance to like 90. That's our opacity. The higher that is, the more opaque it is, less see-through. When you're all right. So hi, you're pasting or dragging what you already have available in the program. What if you don't have any content in the program and you're starting fresh? Great question. So if you're starting fresh, lots of different things you can do. If you're trying to just bring in elements, pretty easy. So So I just go to wherever the element is in my computer. Hopefully you can see this. And then I can pick the image that I want and then simply click and drag it in. And it kind of places it, and I can resize it. Kind of put it exactly how I want, exactly where I want. Cool. Does that help? I'm just using the Option key to kind of scroll out. You can resize that, put this wherever we want. Move to the corner, done. Cool. So you can just bring in elements and things like that just by doing that. You can also go to, yeah, so that's going to be like, that's the primary way that I do it, is that you just kind of click and drag the content in. And there's a lot of things that we can click and drag, and we'll get to a few more of those in a minute. Cool. Hopefully that helped answer the question. Let me know. So, again, I'm going to go ahead and bring this down a little bit. Cool. So that's kind of how we will move stuff from one space to another, and just basically copying and pasting. We can do that after we're kind of building elements and things like that. So if I scroll down here, we're going to go ahead and talk about how to add content. Okay. So we have this circle and this text right here. To create that circle, oh, no, you're fine. I'm happy to answer your question. So, does everything you add come from an existing source? You don't create directly in the program? Yeah. So, if you're using images and things like that, you can bring in things from existing sources. A lot of people will bring in things like entire Photoshop documents that maybe they built out what the home page looks like, and they can bring that in, and all those are interactable documents. But if you wanted to build inside the application, you can do that too. You can do, you'll see that these buttons right here were built inside the application. I'll show you how to do that real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and select the circle tool up here, and then I'm just going to click and drag out a circle. I can hold down the Shift key to maintain like a perfect circle if I want to, as I drop. And then that's kind of placed like that, right? And then if I wanted to bring in text, this is already here for me. But if I wanted to bring in text, I could click on the text tool. And then with text, you have a couple different options here. You can just click to start typing, or you can drag out a box. I typically like to drag out a box because I can resize the box later, and I can kind of set bounding portions for this. So if I click and drag out a box like this is with the text tool selected. Cool, then I can type in whatever I want. Test, text. Cool. And then I can, on this right-hand side, center it, make it bigger. Oh, you gotta highlight it first. Make it bigger. And then change the fill color, whatever I want to do. Cool. Hopefully that makes sense there. And then you can build using this. If you want to change the color of the circle here, click on the circle with the selection tool, which is this little arrow right here. It's your default tool. And then go to fill, and then choose the color that you want. There's also an eyedropper tool here, so if you wanted to match another color, you can click on this, and then just move this eyedropper. It kind of hovers over here. If we wanted this exact orange, we can just hover over it, find it, then click, and you'll see it changes that color to orange. Cool. Make sense? I hope. Feel free to let me know, and please ask questions as we go. I'm here to help out. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these two for now. But hopefully you saw that you can kind of build content from here. And there are squares and triangles and all sorts of different things. And you can, if you're familiar with other applications like Illustrator, you have line and pen tools where you can create content. But you can bring in content from wherever you want. Often if it's images and things like that, you have that kind of set up. Like you kind of, or you go find the images that you want as you need them. Cool. So I went ahead and deleted that there. I'm going to go ahead and deal with these two guys right here. So I have a layer of text in this box right, with the circle in this box here. And the reason why, and the thing that you want to kind of think about when you're building these things out is that you want to think about what you can kind of reuse here. In XD, like it is built for speed. And the idea is that you kind of build one component and you'll use it over and over and over again. So think about like any app you go to. Typically, if you're looking at, if this was like a shopping app, you have kind of the same kind of boxes or bounding boxes and then they just kind of repeat over and over again, like a listing or what have you. So this was created for us. And then one way to kind of repeat things in pretty rapid succession after you've built what you want, how you want it, is a repeat grid. So the repeat grid button is on the top right hand side. This little guy right here. It's called a repeat grid. Once I hit repeat grid, you'll notice that my bounding box changes from blue to green. So what I'll do here is that I have kind of these two sliders, right? So I'm going to click and drag, and you'll see this creates additional copies of that circle there. So I can kind of repeat them over and over again. Now this happens to be 2 components, but you could have multiple. You could have all sorts of stuff in here. You could have like a description box and all these other things in there as well, and then basically select all the things that you want to repeat, and then put them in a repeat grid. Then you can slide left and slide right to kind of fill them out. Cool. Hopefully that made sense so far. And then the other cool thing about a repeat grid, you were talking about bringing in your own images earlier. What we can do is that we can select multiple images from wherever they are. So let me go to my downloads here where I have them under Quick Start Demo. And then you'll see here that I have a couple different images. I have a rubber plant, an umbrella, tree, another rubber plant, right? So what I can do here is I can select multiple images. 2, 3. And then with them all selected, I can click and drag on top of one of them. Then you'll see that once I let go, all 3 of them populate, which is pretty cool. Sweet. And then your imported images are automatically marked for export and made available to download in the design specs. The reason why you want to mark these for export is if you were designing this prototype and then you handed this prototype off to a developer to create the application, if you mark them for export, the photos will travel with the prototype that you share out. So it's really easy for your developer to kind of see what you're doing. Cool. Hopefully that makes sense. But that's basically adding some additional elements. Cool. So next up, I want to talk really quick about building interactions. So we design what we want to see, how we want to see it across the different pages. Again, we start by usually creating artboards using this artboard tool here. Then we build our artboards how we want them with the content that we want, and then we'll want to connect them. So we were in design mode this entire time. We're going to go ahead and switch over to prototype, and that's up here on the top right hand side. So we have next to the home button, you have design, prototype, and share. So I'm going to go ahead and click on prototype, and then you'll see that this menu really slims down. I only get 2 options when I do this. Cool. I can search for content, and then I can click with the regular selection tool. So what we want to do is we need to select the thing that we want to interact, that we want the interaction to take place on. Typically, we don't want the entire page. We'd like an element inside the page. So I can click, but one kind of cool shortcut that you have is you'll see that this is part of a group, and as you kind of work, you may start building groups and things like that. You may have multiple things stacked on top of each other, but if you want one object to be the selectable object, you will hold down the command key and then click on the thing that you want. So I want this circle in my case. You see that circle's highlighted, right? And I'll punch in here just a little bit so you can see it. This little blue circle right here, this guy, is what we're going to use to create the interaction that we want. So once we have the object selected, we're going to click and drag to say when this is clicked, I want it to go to this. So if I click and drag, you'll see this little kind of like whip shows up. This little lead right here, and I'll just attach it where I want it to go. Easy. Cool. So now we have an interaction. We can tell because we have this blue line that's kind of running between these 2 objects. And then once we have the interaction set, we have to set up the trigger. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten up just a little bit over here. So we have interaction trigger, right? So we want to tap. So our trigger is tap. So that when it's touched, we do the thing we want it to do. And then we pick the transition type. So I'll see the type. We'll go ahead and stick with transition for now. And then we're basically set here. So let's go ahead and test it out. So when you create interactions, you almost always want to test them. So to do that, we want to make sure that we have the initial artboard selected, and then we're going to hit this play button up here to preview our document. Click on preview, and then we'll hover over, and then we'll see that when I mouse over, there's this place I can tap on. So if I tap, you'll see it goes to the next page. Cool. So it did what we wanted it to do. Now I want to go back, but when I hit back, nothing happens, right? That's because I did not set up the interaction here. So let me go ahead and set up that let me go ahead and set up the trigger to go backwards. So I'm going to go ahead and select the element that I want. And again, I'll zoom in a little bit here. You can pinch and pull to zoom in if you're on a trackpad, or hold the Option key and scroll if you're on a mouse. I'm on a mouse here. So and then I'm going to go and hold down the Command key. Then I'm going to click on that arrow. Once I do, you'll see that it highlights that arrow specifically. And then I will click on this little guy right here, and I can click and drag back to connect this. But a newer option that's available inside of XD. Let's see here. So if I click on this, let's see. By the way, if you make a mistake or what have you, you can always just click and drag to move this little line. Then it will go back to neutral. So if I click on this, I'll see that I can tap, and then the action I want to set it back to is previous artboard. So now that back button will work like a back button. So if I go and I preview again, click on this guy, go, Monstera, then if I click on this back arrow, it goes backwards. Cool. And hopefully you're starting to see kind of what the idea is here. The idea is to build these interactions so we can go from one space to another space. And there are tons of other interactions in between and lots of things you can do, but this is kind of the general notion. Cool. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions on that. Happy to go backwards. Then we will go ahead and move on to the next piece. Cool. Hopefully this is helpful. So when we are building things, we kind of mentioned a few times how you may want to reuse elements and items and things like that. So I want to talk a little bit about how that works. So we're going to talk first about color, and then about bringing in design elements that you can use in other spaces. So we're going to start with going to our Assets tab. So to get to our Assets tab, I'm going to go back to Design, and then make sure that I am on Assets. That's this little box right here. That's just going to pull up this little side window where we'll see colors, character styles, all that stuff. Cool. So now, once we're here, we're going to go ahead and select whatever we want to use. So I'm going to select this guy here. And let's say that I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So I have this color here. And when you're building apps and things like that, you typically want to keep your colors kind of consistent throughout. So we can set up a color that we can change at any point should we want to, which is pretty cool. So I select the element. I'm going to right click on it. And then I'm going to go to Add Color to Assets. We're going to start with color here. Okay. So I'm going to add the color to Assets. And then you'll see that it now shows up under Colors here. So if I wanted to make something else that color, I simply click it, click on the color, and it changes that color. So the idea is that if your colors are over here in this Assets panel, you can always know exactly what colors you're using. So that way you don't have to use like this fill tool and then just kind of guess what it is. Once you have the color locked in, you can add it to your colors section so that it's always accessible to you. Cool. So let me go ahead and back up here. Now, like I said, feel free to ask questions if you have them. So now I want to change this color. Check this out. So if I click on this color and I double click on it, I can copy the color code. I'm going to right click on it and then hit edit though. Once I do that, I can put it in a different color here. So if I pick a different color, you'll see that everything that same color is changing. That can be super helpful. So that way, if you have, if you're going through and you're designing, you're like, what would these elements look like if they were all purple or all, let's go with blue. So if I go up to blue here, we can see what that looks like. I can kind of manipulate these, move them around. I can dial in specific color codes if I have them. I can control the overall opacity of these guys too, which is cool. Make them super transparent or super see-through. You can just kind of cycle through and kind of pick a color that works for me. I kind of like that orange, so I'm probably going to stay there. But that's one of the benefits of, it's one of the coolest things about XD is this ability to kind of change all the colors on the fly. So I can do that over here as well. So I'm going to add that color to assets. And then if I decide that I want all of these purples, and right click edit to be red or pink or whatever, I can change those when, in any way that I choose, which is pretty neat. Cool. Hopefully that makes sense. But basically you can kind of use these tools to kind of help keep everything together, and keep everything kind of consistent and colored and things like that. So if I wanted to, so you also have this component section here. So you can take individual elements that you either find or create and use those in other places as well. So if I knew that I wanted to use this sun in a different spot this way, I can click, whoops, I could right click it and then make it a component. And now it shows up in my components so that whenever I need another component, I can just click and drag it out and put it where I want it. Pretty cool. So you have kind of like these think of them like libraries you can kind of put them in and kind of pull them when you need them. This is going to be this is awesome for when you create things like buttons and things of that nature, but can be super helpful when you're designing an XD. So I want to make sure that you are aware of this. It's a really powerful tool that I think that not enough people take advantage of. Cool. Hopefully that helps. It makes sense. Go ahead and zoom out a little bit just by pinching and pulling, and then I'm going to scroll down. Cool. So now, what we want to do here is, and actually I'll go up to this artboard to talk about it. One other thing that we want to do here is when I preview this, right? I'll notice that that when I click on this page, these little black bars show up on the top and bottom. That's because I didn't set the viewport appropriately. The viewport is the area that you see when you're looking at the application. These black bars show up because these two viewports are different sizes. So to change the viewport here, I'm going to go ahead and select this. And then I'm going to go to scrolling. Then make sure scrolling is set to vertical. And then and this is where like we have to take a look at the other artboards. So I want to set up scrolling, right? So I'm going to click on this first artboard, and I see that scrolling is 812. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this viewport because I want all of the frames to be the same because we're on a phone or an application or on a mobile application. Our windows, the actual space where we view it doesn't change sizes, but we can scroll. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this guy, select this 812 here, go back to this first one, and then you see the viewport height is way higher than 812. So I'm going to copy this and then paste it here. That sets that viewport height to 812, and then we'll see, and I'll zoom in here, this dashed line. This dashed line means that this is the end of the viewport, and then if we scroll, we'll see the rest. So we'll see what that looks like. Select this guy, go to preview. You'll see now I can scroll. Pretty cool. Sweet. So want to make sure that I shared that with you. So as you're kind of building pages here, you have that. And if you were starting with a fresh page and you wanted to set up scrolling, it's pretty easy. I'm going to go to the artboard tool here. Then I will choose this iPhone size. And then by default, scrolling is set up and it's set to vertical. So now if I wanted to extend the reach of that page, I just click and drag to make it longer or shorter. And that broken line tells me that we can scroll. Cool. Hopefully that makes sense. Awesome. Cool. Well, before we move on to the next thing, and I'll give it a second here, were there any questions that we had? We talked a bit about just kind of like the design, some of the design ideas. We're going to move into some more prototyping ideas, like how we make those interactions go. I'll give it about 20-30 seconds to see if chat catches up. We'll grab a sip of water, then we'll continue. If questions come up, we can always go back. No big deal. Cool. Thanks for hanging out, by the way. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and talk a bit more about prototyping. So once we have content in there, how do we kind of connect it? So, like we talked about before, when we prototype, we want to be in the prototyping section. Typically in XD, if something isn't doing what you want it to do, you're in the wrong section, or at least I am. So I'm going to go ahead and go to prototype here. Make sure I'm in that section. Let's create keyboard shortcuts. Notice this is... Yeah, I have drop-in help. Yeah, but I have... So if you can't make that session, you can look at our other sessions that we have, and then you can always email us at adobecc@email.arizona.edu, and we can try and provide some guidance that way. But yeah, reach out to us. I would absolutely recommend those open training sessions because we have those open trainings carved out for you, but we have them 3 times a week. We have them today, tomorrow, and the next day. But reach out to us at adobecc@email.arizona.edu if you have additional questions, and we'll do our best to support. Cool. Alrighty. So we already kind of talked about some basic wiring, but we'll talk about it again. So when we want to connect content, right? We're going to talk about some of the different things you can do with the prototype. So with the prototyping section. So just like before, I'm going to hold on the command or control key, then click on what I want to use. Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, reach out to us and we will do our best to help out. And if needed, we can set up like a quick Zoom call or something like that to get you helped out or point you in the right direction for resources. So I'm going to go ahead and click and drag here to connect this guy just like we did before. Cool. And then we always want to test our prototypes. Highly recommend when you make big changes that you test them out. So that brings you over here. Cool. Awesome. And then to connect this backwards, I'm going to go ahead and hold down the command or control key on a Windows machine, then click on the element I want. And then, like I said, I can't always click and drag back, but if this page was being referenced by multiple pages, this back arrow would only work to go back to this page, which can be a problem. So what I'd rather do is click on this, and then under action type, I'm going to go ahead and choose previous artboard. So what that does for me is that once I preview it, if I go to this section from multiple pages, whenever I hit back, it's just going to go to the last place it was. Doesn't matter what page was accessing it. And if you wind up developing a prototype that has a lot of different trees to kind of get where you want to go, and you're using this in multiple spaces, that from previous artboard can be really helpful. Cool. All right. So next, we'll talk about auto animate. So basically I'm going to use, we talked about using these interactions as a way to kind of move from one page to another, but we can also use these interactions to convey what motion looks and feels like. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so if I look here, I have a couple different elements, and then the goal of this, because these elements were kind of brought in as a set, is to make it look like when I click on this little, and I'll zoom in a little bit, when I click on this little dot right here, it will look like it's moving from this section to this section. Okay, so there's a little bit of setup here, but what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate the board. So what I'm going to do is on the board here where it says onboarding 01, I'm going to hold down I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to hold down the option key. On a Windows machine, it's Alt. I'm going to click and drag to duplicate the board. So the reason why we want to do that is because we're going to be using what's called auto animate, and for auto animate to work, everything that's on one board has to be on the other one. So like every element has to be the same. So everything in this layers panel has to be identical on both pages. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and start building this out. So from over here, I'm going to select this, and then I can move it. So it doesn't have to be in the same position, just all has to be on the same board. So I'm going to click and drag to move this over to where it's in the center, more or less. All right. So now what I'm going to do is, you'll see this selects the whole group, right? If I want to select different parts of it, I just double click to kind of drill in on that section. So I'm going to select this guy right here, and then I'm going to look at, go to design real quick, and then I want to take a look at how big these guys are. So we'll see right here, and I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it. The height and width of this one is 314. The height and width of this one is 191. So I want to go ahead and basically just swap the values here. So I'm going to go ahead and choose, click on this guy, do 314. And then this little lock right here will make it so that the height and width stay the same, stay at the same ratios, which is what I want to do here. So 314. That way the height and width kind of scale together. I can change where that sits here in a second. I'm not super worried about that right now. We'll fix that in a moment. And I believe this one was 191. Cool. And then I can select, I can move these kind of generally into space. Now, if I select all three of these, one thing that's often underused are these align tools. So the align tool will allow you to take multiple objects and position them in equal space from each other. So I'm going to go ahead and align these vertically in the middle. You'll see that now they're all in the same line there. Then all I really need to do is select, double click to select the center one, kind of move it where I want it to be. Move that to the middle there. And then I'm going to go ahead and take this right one and kind of move it over. Oop. So I need to click on it so it's highlighted in this box, then move it over. And now we can kind of see that they are both on screen here, right? Cool. So we have that. So we have kind of where we were and where we go. And this file is available on letsxd.com if you want to practice with it. It's under the learning section. So what I want to do next is deal with these dots right here. And again, this is kind of one of the ideas that we were talking about, how all the elements need to be the same, but they don't have to be in the same position and they don't have to have the same values. So if we take a look at these dots, I'm going to zoom in a little bit into them so you can kind of see them. Because our interaction is going to be this button right here, the center one. So if I double click on that, I'll see that the opacity is set to 50%. Okay? And this opacity is set to 100. So what I want to do is I want to lower this to 50. Kind of think about like what it would look like on a website. If I click on the second page, the second option would be highlighted and the other ones wouldn't be so highlighted. So that's what that looks like. Okay. Now, if I zoom out a little bit, I can now see that these two guys are kind of set up how I want them. We slide from one to the other. Now we need to do that interaction here. So we're going to go back to the prototype section. And then we're going to select the dot that we want to have the interaction on. So I'm going to go, I can select this entire group, but if I just double click, it selects just that dot, and I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it. So there's our dot. And then what we want to do, I think I want to do this one. So I'll select this dot and click and drag just to create the interaction. And then under, so the trigger is tap. Now the type trigger is an auto animate trigger. Auto animate does some really cool stuff. Again, a couple conditions. Everything has to be the same on both artboards. If you delete one element, this doesn't work. It just does a fade in. But let's look at that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this artboard, and then go to preview. Then if I click on this dot here, you'll see it kind of slides over. So it kind of does that animation for us, which is pretty cool. Now, if I wanted to go back, I would just do the same thing to this guy. Drill down, find this, click back, and under type, set auto animate. So now it kind of goes backwards and forwards. And you'll see it kind of does that transition in between for us. One size is up, one size is down. Again, we're just trying to simulate what that app will look and feel like. Hopefully that makes sense. It's pretty cool. So, you see these are kind of linked up here, right? So now, this work is kind of done here already. But I want to talk about how you can use, because we just talked about how to click, but if you're on a mobile device, you may want to swipe. So we want to kind of simulate what drag would do. So these are set up again. I can select this guy right here because that's what I want to drag on. I'm going to click and connect it over here. Then under action, the trigger is going to be auto animate, but the type's going to be auto animate, but the trigger is going to be drag. So that when I click and drag or swipe my finger across the application, it will move. Cool. So I'll set this guy up here, and then we'll take a look at what that looks like. So now if I click on this and drag it, you'll see that that I can kind of control the differences in between. So kind of cool, and a way to kind of show what interactions would look and feel like. And you'll see that those artboards change. Notice the dots down here when I do that. Cool. But if I let go, I can't go backwards because I didn't set the opposite action to happen. So I click and drag this little connector right there. So have it set to drag, auto animate, and now I should be able to drag back and forth in between the two prototypes pretty easily. But you can kind of get those simulations of interaction right here, which are pretty cool. Hopefully that helps. Sweet. Alrighty. So lots of different interactions you can do, but I want to go ahead and talk about one more. So we're going to talk about overlays. So what overlays allow us to do is basically create kind of a pop-up menu that shows up here. So on most websites, I'm going to go ahead and hit preview here. Now select the right board first. On most applications and things like that, you have these buttons here that do things. Like you'll click on this little hamburger menu here, and then like a menu would pop up to give you places to go. So we're going to go ahead and rig that up. But so we're going to go ahead and click on this little hamburger section here. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it. These little 3 lines are called a hamburger menu. Okay. And then I'm going to click and drag here. I'm going to drag all the way over to our menu. Now, we're going to use a special trigger type called overlay. So notice this solid line here. That means that we have like a regular interaction. But if we go to type and then click on overlay, then it becomes a dashed line. And then this little green dialog box pops up here. So this will allow us to select where this menu is going to show up on screen. I want it to show up right about there. We can also choose an animation type. So if I want it to slide up from the bottom or slide down from the top, I'll go ahead and do slide up. And then I will I'll leave it there actually. But you can kind of choose where it's going to go and where it's going to be, like that. Cool. And then we'll test it out. You'll see there's our menu. And if we click away, it goes away, which is great. Now the next thing we want to do is make sure that those buttons do things. So we're going to go to our overlay menu. And the beauty of using overlay menus is that if you build a menu system in an overlay, you only have to build it once. You don't have to build it on every single page for it to work. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up to where when you click on this guy, you click on this section, I want your plants to go to this your plants folder. Now notice that that has dashed lines. So that means that it's set up to be an overlay right now. We don't want that. We just want the transition. So if we go to type and go to transition, we'll see that now has a solid line on it, which is what we want. So that takes us to that page. I'm going to go and do the same thing with browse and then have it send us back here. Cool. And then we'll test it out. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my initial prototype page, then hit the play button, and then hit this menu here. That pulls this guy up. And then we will hit your plants. Let's see, it takes us to the your plants page. Pretty cool. Now, this hamburger menu doesn't do anything because we didn't set it up. So we're going to do that one more time. Click on the hamburger menu here. Because remember, it's set it up per page. I'll click and drag, and then we're going to set our interaction to overlay. Let's slide up. Cool. Let's test it out. It's supposed to work. Okay. Boop, boop, boop. Sometimes you gotta play with it. All right. So let's try that. Cool. Let's see if we can go from more plants to browse and back. You can kind of hopefully start to see how you can kind of use this to kind of build a system. And if you hit the wrong button there, like if you hit your plants, it'll just, you're already on your plants, so it'll hide away. Cool. So there are overlays. Hopefully that helps out. And hopefully you can kind of see that it can kind of be fun to start building out what these prototypes look and feel like. So that kind of wraps up the initial parts of prototyping inside of XD. But now we're going to go ahead and talk about some housekeeping and then how you share. And then I'll be around for any quick Q&A you have. This should go pretty fast. So when you're ready to share a prototype, you may have noticed, and I'll zoom in a little bit here to show, there's this little home tab here. So when you have a page selected, this little gray box will show up on every page. So if you want this to be the home screen or where you start, you want to go ahead and make sure that that little house is clicked. So that way, whenever you go to preview, it's always going to start on that home page. Now this is important because we're going to share this, and you defining that home page is how people are going to see this application and where it's going to start. Okay. So when you're done with this application and you're ready to share it out, you're going to go to the share section. Once you share, you will select the artboards that you want to share, and then you'll need to create a link here. So you have a few different settings here. You have, I'll zoom in a little bit easier to see hopefully. So we have the title of this. We can call this prototyping demo, but name it something that makes sense for you. You have a few different design views. You have a few different view settings here. You have design view, development view, presentation, user testing. So if you want someone to test out your website, that's would be the one for that. Or you can set up a custom experience. We're gonna go ahead and go with development, because we're gonna say that this is ready to kind of share with a developer, and I want to show you what that offers you. So you can also hit how you want it to export. So if you're exporting out, if you want to export it for use on web or iOS, which is Apple, or Android devices, which are Google devices, you have all your downloadable assets there. If this is something that's sensitive, you can either have it set so that only invited people can view it, or so that if it's anyone with a link, they have to have a password. I'm not going to do that for this, but if you're dealing with more sensitive material, I could totally understand why you would. I'm going to go ahead and hit create the link. That creates literally a web page that you can use. And then you just copy and paste the web page into a web browser. So I'll copy this. And it shows up over here. Then there's our web page. And then your user can try it out and see what it would look and feel like in actual practice, which is pretty cool. The reason why I chose development is because you may be building something that's an application that you want to use somewhere else. So if you click on this little guy right here, this will show you the source. So it shows you not only how big were the windows that you chose so that they can build to the same specs. It has the images that you used, all the colors that you have, whatever interactions you used, along with detailed explanations of them, what fonts you had. So it basically gives you everything, gives your developer everything they will need to start taking your prototype from this prototype state into an actual functioning application. So pretty cool stuff. And then there's also a section where you can make comments and things like that. But this little piece right here, super helpful for people who are developing for this content. And then they're going to be pretty familiar with it. They'll be able to kind of download it and use it. But I wanted to make sure that we shared that with you. Cool. So that being said, that's about the wrap up for the workshop. If you make changes to this application here, so if I say created Let me go back over here. I created a different page. The one thing you want to note is that when we go to share it again, we'll see update link here. So that will update any changes that you made to the application. So if you're sharing this out, then you make some changes to it, then you want to share it, and you want them to look at it again, update the link. They can use the same URL as before, and you're good to go. Cool. So that's the first look at XD. As far as like places to go next, I highly recommend. We have open training and office hours and all of these other things to get you helped out should you need it. But let me see here. Safari, cool. There's also, the website is letsxd.com. Here, basically, XD is it's a platform that evolves quite a bit. A lot of the core principles are the same, but if you really wanted to dig into XD and what it can do, you have an entire kind of website from Adobe dedicated to this application. But this Learn tab here, this Getting Started with Danny, I can't recommend enough. This walks through basically all the basics of how to create content inside of XD, including components and all the other stuff. So lots going to go off of there. And then for just kind of general help with Adobe stuff, help.adobe, not help.apple, help.adobe.com. You can pick the application you want to learn from, then there are tutorials and all the others, and all sorts of other things here. There's an entire Getting Started course that will walk you through kind of all the basics of XD. If you really want to know it inside out, upside down, and backwards, this is what I recommend. But you can also have that for all the other applications like Photoshop and things like that as well. So hopefully that helps out. But like I said, that about does it for the workshop. I really hope it was helpful, and I hope that you tried this stuff. Our email again is adobecc@email.arizona.edu. I encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions. And I'm around for a few more minutes, so I'd love to know if you have any questions before we wrap this up and sign off. Cool. Well, thank you so much for attending this workshop or looking at it afterward. As far as other things, you can find all of our training on our training calendar right here. And our training collection also has a great collection of YouTube videos and things like that for you to take a look at to sharpen your skills. Thank you so much for hanging out. My name has been Brian, and we will see you on the next workshop. Take care. Be safe. Bear down.